Let's talk about the unfortunate circumstance here. The elephant in the room, if you will. There's a now infamous ECW title match that's supposed to happen on this pay per view between Johnny Nitro and CM Punk, which Nitro won. And of course, that's not the original plan. Chris Benoit was supposed to be here. He doesn't show up. And a lot of folks think that's way out of character for him to miss a show, and apparently like no show, no call. And
Right.
I think people probably started to assume that there was some sort of an accident or what have you. What do you remember first hearing backstage about, hey man, where's Chris?
It was just that rumbling. We didn't know where he was. And so at that point, I had quite a bit of seniority. So when I spoke, people tend to listen. I remember saying, one thing's for sure. If Chris Benoit is not at a pay-per-view, something's wrong, like something major. I was thinking health problem, that he had some type of health problem. But he was not the type of guy who would miss a match at all. Now, the next day, after that talk with Mr. McMahon, still no sign of Chris Benoit, but Vince understands how I'm offended by that angle, and he sends you don't want to be part of it, go home. So he sent me home, and on that night there was just awful weather throughout the Southeast and the Southwest. Flights were being canceled and delayed, so I'm sitting in the Corpus Christi airport. I'm trying to think, this is 2007. The internet was around, but I didn't have access to it. I would not have had a tablet or anything like that. I probably just had a flip phone. But I start hearing rumblings. Maybe it's from local news that there's been this tragedy, and I can't get more information. And because my flight is delayed and I've been rerouted, and it's one of those situations where you end up in Atlanta 4 hours after you're supposed to be there. Atlanta is such an enormous hub that when a weather condition hits like that, everyone's scampering for the hotel rooms. And I end up in, it's bad even by my standards, dangerous place to be, a lot of action going on in the parking lot. Like one of these hotels you would see in the movie The Florida Project, where people are there for extended times. There's, a variety of improprieties going on before your very eyes. And it's sinking in that this person I've known and respected for a long time, Chris Benoit, and even more so, Nancy, who I'd known since 1990. They're not with us anymore, and I'm devastated. By the next day, I think it was by the next day, the realization has come that this wasn't a break-in, that this was something more complex. I start getting those phone calls from the different outlets, and I'm not ready to talk about it yet. But when I get home, I'd say by the time I got home, I was already down in the sense that, a depression had snuck in that would stick around for a while, because I'd always been such a proud, not just advocate, but kind of representative of wrestling, and always stood up for it. And this was something that just devastated us, because it asked us to defend the indefensible in the aftermath of the deaths and suicides. I think the only guy who came across well was Chris Jericho, because Chris was wise enough to understand that nobody gains from a shouting match.
Yeah.
And he said he would only be on if he was the only guest. That's the only way you really make your points. Otherwise, I've been on those situations, where you go to like CNN and it's you and three professional panelists, and they all have to get their stuff in. And you're kind of depending on the person running the show to ask you a question so that you can talk. But other than that, you got to butt in. And like I said, you're dealing with three people who are doing that as a living. It's really uncomfortable. They had a lot of misinformation out there. Everyone wanted to go with the roid rage thing. I remember Chris Jericho, Chris, real smart guy. He says he reads off a list of effects, and jittery, and there's a bunch of them: jittery, uptight, prone to frustration, blah blah blah. He reads it off, and then the woman goes, "Well, this just goes to show what the steroids can do." And Chris said, "I just read you the effects of too much caffeine." And he had a way of putting things in perspective. Like, we all jump out. It's a shame that news is it revolves around the ratings.
Yeah.
So it's entertainment. It's not so much news. When I was growing up, the news was a lost leader. It wasn't there to make money. It was there as a public service. And then you have guys trying to outdo each other on different networks. So for that week, it was a free for all, and I didn't want any part of it. I remember I'd been approached by the Bill O'Reilly show, and I was going to do it. And it was actually one of the representatives from Child Fund International who said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And I said, "Yeah, I think Bill would treat me well." And she said, "You've done a lot of good work in the world. I don't think you should trust that this one guy is going to do the right thing for you." And I went, "All right, yeah, that's a valid point." And I didn't talk about it. One thing I was really, when I say I was struggling, I think a lot of us in the industry were struggling in the aftermath of that tragedy. Our personal appearances were cut down dramatically. Nobody wanted to book a pro wrestler for a period of time. And the few things I did do, I remember going to Six Flags over Texas, and you just feel like every eyeball is upon you, like, oh, you're one of those guys. Looking back, Conrad, after Eddie Guerrero's death, all of us were sad, but Chris was devastated. There's that clip of him, and he's bawling his eyes out. And so I thought, the writing side of me might try to understand it and write a fictitious, but in a sense, historically, inspired book called Letters to Eddie, in which you see a human being losing his grip on reality and succumbing to his demons through his own words. And I never followed through with that. I think it would have been really interesting, but I have no doubt. And I don't want to say I don't have any doubt, but it would not surprise me. And I think I'm almost sure that Eddie's death played so heavily on Chris's mind, having lost his very best friend, that he was never quite the same. You compound that with the style he had that was relentless. He wasn't one of those guys who changed gears as he got older, learned how to make audiences laugh, learned to connect in another way. He never did that. He was just going to give you everything he had, every single match. And he was, you don't come back after neck surgery and still drop the headbutt off the top rope. You don't do that. I wish somebody had pulled him aside and said, "You got a lot of moves. You got to come up with something different. I don't care if Tommy Billington did it or not. You need to stop coming off the top rope with a surgically repaired neck." But some of these guys, they push themselves so hard. I believe Chris, who was always, small by wrestling standards, continued to use, enhancers even while he was recovering from his neck surgery. So it was sad. It was really sad. He was an intense guy by nature anyway. I think he was greatly affected by the loss of his friend. I do not know what was going on behind the scenes in his marriage. I mean, I've never found out for sure if Daniel had Fragile X syndrome. I don't know what the situation was. I just know it was tragic and one of the worst things that's ever happened to us. And it really set WWE and wrestling back a ways because it came across so negatively in the media.
And man, the loss of life for Nancy and her son Daniel just can't be overstated. There's nothing we can say that will make that better. But golly, what a senseless tragedy. But I do want to ask, and man, this is awkward to bring up, but we didn't know what we know now back then about head trauma, and back in my day, people used to say, "Oh, it was bell rung," and that was sort of it. And now we've learned and we've gotten better, and I'm thankful for that. But when you're getting to try to process all of this, and I think a lot of people don't want to hear that maybe CTE was a part of this, and think that that's a cop out or an excuse, and I certainly understand it. But CTE did become a topic during this era, and Chris Benoit did become one of those examples. And with what we know about concussions, well, pal, you've had a bunch of those that
Yeah.
start to get into your mind like, man, I don't know what happened with Chris, but if we kind of shared the same experience in the ring, that has to be a little scary, right, man?
It is. It is. And, we're talking about doing this benefit for Steve Mongo McMichael
Yes, sir.
in the beginning of September. And you asked me, like, how quickly was I on that? Like,
Immediately.
affirmative. Oh, I'll be there. I don't care if I have to spend next day in Chicago. I mean, I was a huge Bears fan from the time 1969. I had a Dick Butkus poster hanging over my bed, and he finally signed it like 25 years later, which is a good story for another time. But I love the Bears. I remember when Deborah was my assistant, I told her, I said, yeah, I was a big Bears fan. I said, I bet you I could still rattle off 10 names from the 86 Super Bowl team. And she went, really? And I went, boom, 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 and had them all. And so here's Mongo, who was just not just larger than life, and that he was a 275-pound monster of a man, but lived life with a gleam in his eye. And he looks like he's down below 100 pounds. It's heartbreaking. You can still see the light in his eye, and you can't prove that it was the concussions, but there's definitely a link between football and pro wrestling and early onset ALS. Conrad, I went as a guest to Chris Nowinski's to the gala for the Boston Center for Traumatic Encephalopathy. I think it's called Concussion Legacy Institute now, but I figure as long as I can continue to say Boston Institute for Traumatic Encephalopathy, I'll be okay.
Yep.
But there was a running back who was in a wheelchair with early onset ALS, and he said, it's the same thing that you did. He said, back in my day, they said, you got your bell rung.
Yeah.
You got a dinger. And he said, if instead of being told I had my bell rung or I got a dinger, if my coach had looked me in the eye and said, you have just suffered a traumatic brain injury, he said, I might not be in this chair.
Wow.
Because we really downplayed head injuries. Guys who did not wrestle with head injuries were looked down upon. We had the benefit, like when I had a concussion, I could say, hey, listen, man, don't hit me in the head today. Let's go after my knee. That's something we could do. But really what we should have been doing is taking 10 days off or 8 days off. But you just did not do that at the time. We learned so much, right? Like going back to the cell match, I'll say during my shows, hey, we've learned a lot. And if the same situation presented itself in 2022, that match should be stopped.
Yes.
And I'd say, luckily for me, in a weird way, it wasn't, because had that cell match been stopped, it would have trended. Now, let's just say this was a new match. It would have trended for 2 days and then been forgotten. Yeah. And instead, because of the actions of the survivors, meaning me and The Undertaker and Terry Funk as well, it was like a snowball going downhill, gathering momentum. But the line I use, and you've been at the show when I use this one, it's like, we didn't stop matches. We bought time.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of that, but it's also like living in the dark ages, we don't buy time these days. We stop matches and we don't worry about the match that day. We worry about the next, 30, 40 years of that participant's life. So we have learned a lot. I know that the CTE diagnosis has been really helpful to Chris's dad. I have to feel like something went wrong in there because he was such a humble, nice guy, very intense, very difficult on himself. But, I don't remember many people having a cross word with Chris. He was very highly thought of. I could not call him a good friend because he was one of the guys that I went, "Hey, Chris, how you doing? Family good?" And you think, like you go through that same routine and you realize that other than the 2 times we traveled, like we never really had a big conversation. But it was always pleasant, and especially when Nancy was there with his kid, with his boy, Daniel, I'd gather around and spend a little extra time because Nancy and I, had the friendship going back to 1990, 89, actually, when I joined WCW. So I'm still skeptical as to whether anybody, no matter their brain condition, would have it in them to pick up a gun and kill someone they love. Like, I don't know. That's a step beyond. I say it probably would not have happened had he not had the brain injuries, but I don't think you can blame it on the brain injuries alone, if that makes sense.
I don't think we need to give him a pass. I would like to talk about Nancy Sullivan. Any fun or interesting Nancy Sullivan stories you can share with us? I don't think we celebrate her nearly enough.
No, we don't. And I wrote an article about her a couple of years ago. I don't do it nearly as frequently as I used to. But every once in a while I'll sit down and I'll write an article that takes 3 or 4 hours. And those are the articles I'm proudest of. They're not the articles that get the widest readership, because if you want people to react to stuff you put up a funny meme or you put up a photo with a 1-sentence description. But sometimes I like to take the deep dive, and I did that with Nancy. And I brought up the fact that when I met her, she was a woman, Kevin Sullivan's wife, and she was managing Doom, Ron Simmons, and Butch Reed, and she was much higher on the card than I was. I was Kevin's project, Sullivan Slaughterhouse. But I'll tell you what, Conrad, I've been around a long time. I know when I'm being blown off. I know when someone's not interested in talking to me at the least, and I never got that from Nancy. Actually, I got the antithesis. She was always all smiles. Like, I remember her writing like in a notebook, almost like she was a middle schooler, like Nancy loves Kevin. Like, they were a really happy couple together. It's crazy they suffered that wrestling. What is it? They worked themselves into a shoot.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, crazy. You don't ever I think if a booker approaches you about having a real life, an angle with your real life spouse, just go, I've seen the documentation on this. I'm not going to fall into that trap. But after she left WCW, she was a regular in ECW, and she was great there. I worked with her a lot because she was Sandman's second, and I had the feud with Sandman. And I think people forget just how hot, when I say hot, I'm talking about the crowds in Florida. Yeah. These are people who believed. And if they didn't believe in all of it, they believed in Kevin Sullivan, that he was the devil incarnate. So when this woman comes off and joins forces, like, you're putting your life on the line in some of those small Florida towns, and they welcomed that type of heat. So I think when you put together the work she did as Fallen Angel in Florida, the work she did as a woman with the incredible transformation, this is going back to like 88, where Rick Steiner was on his first date with this cute, girl with the pigtails and the horn-rimmed glasses. And then before his eyes, she transforms into a woman. It was really great TV. I think when you put all those things together, the 3 different runs she's had, that she's really deserving of more recognition, and maybe the holy grail is the WWE Hall of Fame. I think eventually it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen in the next few years, though.
Just because of the optics of, the negative connotation it would bring about with fans.
Yeah, I think on the heels of China's induction, I'm overjoyed that Joni was inducted, but I don't think you want consecutive, and that may have been 2 years ago. I may not be mixing up my years. I'm not sure if you want consecutive or even
Tragedies.
Tragedies, female tragedies. I think you want to give those a few years. When it's tough when you induct someone posthumously, and the deaths are not by natural causes. I think you got to space them out a little bit.
Listen, it's an awkward conversation to have, but I hope people will take a little time today and go celebrate some Nancy stuff. We're talking about
Yeah,
stuff. Go watch some of her stuff in ECW and WCW and really, really fun stuff with her. And let's, as silly as it sounds, try to talk about wrestling a little bit now. But in the back of your mind, there is this, hey, what's going on with Chris thing? And then it all changes the next day. Of course, originally it was hyped as a federal investigation to continue the Vince McMahon death storyline. But once we understand that the Benoit family is no longer with us, the whole show changed into a Chris
yeah,
Benoit memorial show instead. And just to remind everybody, we didn't know the circumstances at the time.
right,
WWE wishes they had that one back. But as the
sure,
legend goes, at some point during the show, people started to suspect, wait, maybe there was more to it than this. And listen, we've beat that up. I don't think we necessarily have to talk about it anymore, but it's something that no one will really be able to discuss in a proper way. I think for Nancy and Daniel. I don't
right.
know. Wrestling fans really just gravitate to talking about Benoit, and I understand that. But hey, woman did her thing too, and Daniel was a kid, and I don't know, man. There's no way to sort of put a bow on this. I'm just rambling at this point.
Yeah, I had a situation when I was in Bloomington, Indiana, my birthplace, and they've got a great club there called the Comedy Attic. And there was a guy sitting front row to the left of the stage wearing a shirt that says, "I'm a Chris Benoit guy." And I said, "Oh man, I know it's a free country. You should be able to wear what you want, but I think there's a point." And the point to me is now I can't look at that side of the
Yeah.
crowd. So after a while, after about 10 minutes, I go, "All right, listen, I got to address something going on." I said, people can wear what they want. I said, but when you're wearing an "I'm a Chris Benoit guy" shirt, you have to realize he murdered a friend of mine. Now I can't look at this section of the crowd, which hurts the show. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to go to the back so I don't have to see you, and therefore I can give these people the show they deserve. And the thing is, he went back. He wasn't mad at me. He was in tears because he couldn't understand why that would upset anybody. And he did not want to make me angry. He wasn't doing it to be a wise ass. And I'm generally pretty good given that I am an autism dad and I have a son on the spectrum, although he's doing phenomenal. Oh my God. Maybe we'll have him come in and play some guitar on a future show because the gains this guy has made. It's really inspiring. But I'm really good at picking out people who need a little extra time, and this may have been one of them. So he didn't just bail out and say "screw you." He stuck around for the meet and greet. He did, and he didn't yell at me. He had tears in his eyes. And I said, "Yeah, I can't remember." I said, "You have to understand," and I laid it out to him. That if you're wearing something that distracts and puts me in a situation where I can no longer look at a third of the audience, that hurts the show. And that's why I had to put you back there. And he understood. And I said, I brought up the part about the murder. And then, so to this day, it's unfortunate. Yeah, over the past few days in Australia, I signed the Backlash DVD, which actually has Chris on the cover. He had a great match. He always had great matches. But man, wow. Just a really, really, really tragic situation that set our business back for a while because nobody wanted to do business with pro wrestlers for quite a while.